Hello, everyone. This is the Right Geek here with Marina Fontaine. I would like to apologize in advance if I cough in the middle of talking. I have very bad allergies right now, so I might not sound the greatest. But all the same, I am happy to bring you our guest for tonight, Marina Fontaine, and I'm going to give her a chance to introduce herself and talk about some of the books that she has written, some of the stories she has written, and then we'll get into some of the conversations that we're going to talk about tonight. So, Marina, go ahead, take it away.
Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for having me. Let me, I guess, introduce myself for those who don't know. I am, I call myself Russian by birth, American by choice, and a book addict, and that pretty much describes me in one sentence. I have two books out. They're both dystopias, and I will talk about them later on. I run a group of conservative and libertarian authors on Facebook. It's called Conservative Libertarian Fiction Alliance. And I also have a group on Goodreads called Small Government Book Club. That's pretty much my first introduction, and we can take it from there.
All right, so, excuse me. So the two books that you have written and the one short story that you have written have all taken place in dystopian universes. So let me ask you, first of all, what is it about the dystopian genre that attracted you as an author, and why did you decide to pursue that particular genre?
I would say it's a combination, you know how they say write what you know. So that is definitely a part of it, because I did grow up in the former Soviet Union, so I am familiar with that type of society. And another part of it is people are also told to write what they read. And the genre does attract me as a whole because I am just interested in the different types of societies. People in general deal with oppression and how they deal with difficult circumstances and challenges. And dystopian genre as a whole allows to explore individual choices as well as choices that society as a whole makes. So I decided to write something partly in response to a lot of dystopian books that I have read, and I decided to do something slightly different because a typical dystopian story is very, very dark, and traditional older stories were mostly meant to scare us of all the horrible possibilities that might or might not happen. But I also feel that at this point, it's also necessary to show that if we ever come to live under oppression, that there is always a way out, because in reality, there will always be people who don't submit and who will fight. And there is always a way to deal even with the worst circumstances.
That's interesting. I noticed that lately, dystopian fiction has been very much in the news, especially with Hulu putting out their series on The Handmaid's Tale. And it has been actually an uprising genre over the past few years, especially in the young adult section, which I happen to know a lot about as a teacher who works with teens that for which that fiction is actually targeted. So I guess I want to ask you, you said you wanted to do something different with the dystopian genre. So what are the things that you have noticed in the dystopian genre, especially in recent years, that are sort of your pet peeves that you would like to see less of in the genre?
Right. My biggest pet peeve, and that's regardless of the political inclinations, because obviously a lot of these dystopias, they're almost afraid of the wrong thing. A lot of them are afraid of a government that's just controlled by a large corporation or by the rich and powerful, or people who are just intrinsically incredibly evil. Like, you know, President Snow in the Hunger Games, there's pretty much no redeeming quality. When in reality, a lot of people who run dystopian societies in real life, a lot of them start with good intentions, and especially people, not necessarily, you know, Stalin and Hitler and such, but people at the lower level, a lot of them are just regular people who get forced into these circumstances and end up supporting these horrible conditions and can't themselves get out of those jobs and those circumstances. So that's part of it. And another part of it is that a lot of stories that we see nowadays are just so unrelentingly dark. And again, they focus more on scaring us and not really showing us the good parts. And it's, in a way, it's not realistic, because even in the worst of societies, there is always ways for people to find joy, to fall in love, to have fun, to laugh, even no matter how badly everything goes around them, there are always these moments of grace. And a lot of these dystopian stories just don't take time to show that side, just the human side of both the heroes and, in a way, the villains. So this is what I try to do, especially with my novel, because obviously a novel gives more space to work with different characters.
Right. One of the things that I noticed when I read your novel, Chasing Freedom, was its kind of episodic nature, where instead of trying to tell sort of a continuous story from start to finish, you kind of captured the viewpoints and the experiences of the characters at different points of time. Is there a particular reason why you wrote the story that way? And does that help serve your intentions as far as displaying what dystopian societies are really like?
Right. I wanted to focus on the characters because I didn't want so much to spend time describing the world just with the narrative. And I thought it would be more interesting to show it from the points of view of different people, and where you have the rebel leaders, but at the same time you have regular people who just get involved, sometimes not intending to get involved, but you know, the reality sort of catches up to them. And also you get to see people who work for the government and the choices that they sometimes have to make. So it allowed me to cover a lot of the world just through the eyes of the characters, because I have one of the characters who is an artist. I have one of the characters who is kind of on the other side, so to speak. I have a couple of prison guards. I have a character whose life has been changed by what's going on with the healthcare system, who lost a family member because of the healthcare system being screwed up. And it allowed me to show more of the world without just telling about it. It made it more personal.
Right. So it's more, excuse me, show rather than tell through the eyes of the people who are experiencing it. And I think the fact that you showed the dystopian world through all of those different perspectives allowed the reader to understand more fully how people would actually react in those situations. And it felt more realistic, I think, than a lot of the dystopians that are out there, which I've noticed and I feel take things to some pretty ridiculous extremes, which those often are very enjoyable stories to read. And sometimes things can be taken to ridiculous extremes if we're not careful. But I think what might be more useful for us now is not to tell stories about the really out there dystopias that that people tend to gravitate towards, but more towards the dystopian societies that are actually more likely given the conditions that exist right now. And I think that your novel, in a way, does that. In what way did your own personal experiences inform how you crafted that novel?
I was able to get a little deeper into the heads of some of the characters, because even some of the smaller things were things that I experienced myself. Like, I don't know if you remember, there is this very small scene where this teenager is holding an orange in his hand. And to him, it's like this precious jewel because it's so, so rare. And he's enjoying the look and the smell, and just, it's not something you quite can understand unless you've been there. And growing up, something like an exotic fruit, exotic to us, an orange, it was something very, very special and very valuable. So I could really do those, just insert those little things into the story that I thought made for a more complete world, that maybe someone who is just writing, just not to say making things up, but writing from just a more general understanding may not have.
Yes, I think that.
At the same
Yeah,
time,
sorry.
also, I have seen people who have, not that they have become immoral necessarily, but the types of compromises that people are forced to make when they live in oppressive societies, because it's all good to try to be as moral as possible, but sometimes you have to break the law, and sometimes you have to cover for some illegal activity, whether or not you want to, just to survive or to keep your friends or to put food on the table in a way. So I try to show that as well.
Yes, and I think that a lot of those small details help to fill out a dystopian world in a way that descriptions of the larger panorama really can't do. If you can have a character pick up a piece of fruit like an orange and be like, wow, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen, I think that's that sends a message about the kind of world that he's living in that, as you suggested, is a lot more intimate and a lot more personal than just talking about the political panorama of the world. It's important to show that that it affects a lot of everyday things as well.
Right, and I think, as you said before, a lot of the modern dystopian stories, they are kind of out there, and they are fun to read, but it's also very easy to kind of dissociate from it. And some of the worlds that so, so horrible that it's kind of scary, but it's also something that you always know it's not going to happen. That it's almost like, reading a zombie story. It's
Hmm.
scary, but you know it's not going to happen in real life. Um, so when I went a somewhat more realistic route, in a way it could get more disturbing to read at some point because you could actually see it happening. If things turn a certain way, some of the things could very well happen. And but that's also why I kind of intersperse, like I have chapters that some horrible stuff happens, and but then I give my characters something to live for and to strive for, because I'm also taking them through years and years of their lives, and it's not realistic to say that nothing good will happen to them. That
Mm.
they will, because people do fall in love and people do try to build their lives as best they can. And again, that's a lot of times it's missing in modern dystopias, that the authors just don't take the time to address that part.
And now, since you are a dystopian author and somewhat of an expert on the subject, I have to ask you, do you think a dystopia like The Handmaid's Tale is actually going to ever become a reality?
No. A lot of these old, I call them old-fashioned dystopias. Um, they're based on societies that are closed, that there is very little room for um, people working outside of the society. That, like in 1984, the surveillance is so complete that there is no place to hide. There is no room for rebellion. In Handmaid's Tale, the same thing. You have these women being watched all the time, and all the bad guys are bad guys all the time. But in reality, it just doesn't work that way, because as much as the Soviet Union existed for 70 years, just about, but the reason it existed for so long is because there was so much corruption going on underneath. So there was never this total control as is depicted in some of these dystopias. It just doesn't happen, because people are people and they're going to find a way to work around. And if anything, the government at some point realized that that's the only way for them to stay in power, because they will need to give some kind of escape valve. Like at some point, I forgot what the statistics were, that some huge percentage of food in the Soviet Union was either sold in the black market or produced through small farms and just sold and bartered hand to hand. And that's how people ended up surviving, rather than having circumstances like right now we're seeing in Venezuela. It became terrible. But most of the time there are these escape valves and ways to circumvent at least some of the oppression. So as I said, something like A Handmaid's Tale, 1984, even the Hunger Games to a lesser extent, you have this total control that doesn't really happen in real life.
Not even when governments aspire to it can they really succeed in
Yeah, I mean,
controlling every single aspect.
to an extent, but people are people, and there's always a level of corruption. There's no, in the beginning, when the revolutions happen, they always start with true believers, and then when you get these horrible purges and everything. But once the society kind of settles into it, there's always going to be something going on underneath to both sustain the society and give people an opportunity to kind of not challenge it, but circumvent it in some ways.
Right, that makes sense. We actually see, if you look at real societies that are oppressive in some way, we can see in the world today how people, as you say, use the black market to circumvent their government, or they use other means of getting around the strictures of their government. And yes, corruption is a big factor. If you have a, or if you are a minor government official that is in charge of giving someone a permit, you're going to be happy with taking a bribe because you're probably not making that much money anyway. So I think you're right that people being people, corruption and black markets are going to basically get around any kind of totalitarian society that anyone can dream up, for sure. On a related topic, I know that you mentioned to me in pre-show chats that one topic that you like to discuss a great deal is the idea of dark and depressing being equated with being deep. This is actually something that peeves me as well, that if you talk about, if you talk to people who kind of feign being literary and we should write genre literature that speaks to the human condition, etc., and so forth, the kinds of stories that they tend to favor are ones that are, I don't really have a better way to put it, but to say that they're kind of emo teen angst in the way that they're written, and they are not really sort of realistic depictions of what the world is actually like. So if you'd like to comment on that for a few minutes.
Yeah, sure. It is kind of my pet peeve, and it has been for a while, and not just because I prefer to read things that are more uplifting, but also because life doesn't really work that way. And when you try to depict the human condition in its entirety, there is really no such thing as a story. Like, no matter how terrible life is for whatever reason, there is really no such thing as a story that is depressing beginning to end. It starts dark, goes darker, and ends up darkest, which is, if you look at a lot of things that kids are being made to read in high school nowadays, it's just terrible. And, you know, I have a theory. I don't know if it's just my personal theory, that people who are comfortable and who have had lives that are generally good, and that includes most of our young generation. I mean, I know they like to complain that they have it hard, but in comparison, I'm sorry, but they don't. So they seek out this darkness in fiction because they almost want to experience it vicariously. But after you've lived for a while and you've experienced real darkness and real sickness and loss and depression, you kind of stop looking for it in your fiction. I mean, some people still do, but it's not really necessary because you've already experienced it. And to me, fiction is about discovering something new and learning something new. So I think it's more important to a lot of people to find things to uplift themselves, even when times are not so great. And I don't know that we're giving it to them as a whole. When you look at the body of what passes for literature, I don't think there is enough of it out there.
No, I agree. Basically, where you're going to find the uplifting stuff is in the indie market right now, which is why I've always been a big booster of Amazon and of indie authors, such as yourself. Yes, the New York publishing establishment, as far as I can tell, have basically embraced a sort of teen emo angst way of looking at the world. And so all of their fiction, well, not all, but a lot of their fiction seems to reflect that ethos. And yes, if you're someone like me who has been physically disabled by rheumatoid arthritis and therefore spends a lot of her life in pain and in suffering, when you pick up a book, yes, you want to get away from all of that, and you want to basically escape into a world where you don't have to worry about that so much, and where you can sort of vicariously enjoy the adventures of people maybe who are more able-bodied than you and therefore have more opportunities than you to go and explore kind of the wonders of the universe. So I definitely agree with your sentiment that after a while, as you get older and you experience life more, you start to get tired of that dark and depressing stuff. Although I can remember even in high school, in 11th grade, when I was forced to read The Catcher in the Rye, for example, I can remember being turned off even then by that kind of story, because well, in the case of that book, I just thought the main character was absolutely insufferable. And it's like, seriously, grow up. Not everyone is a fraud and a fake, and you don't know everything about the universe. You're a kid. Shut up. And I was thinking this when I was 17. So, and that was before the, although I'd always had some physical difficulty, that was before the arthritis got really bad. So I don't know. Maybe I just always had this viewpoint that the depressing stuff really just did not appeal to me at all. What do you think is driving sort of the literary establishment's preference for these depressing stories, when based on sales and based on what the reading public seems to be attracted to, if you look at the Amazon rankings and whatnot, why do you think they keep producing this sort of dark and depressing stuff when it seems like more and more of the readership that anymore and they're kind of tired of it?
I think it just comes from this, I don't want to say bias, but maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's just their worldview that life, not to be crude about it, but life sucks and then you die. A lot of the people who end up, unfortunately, and not to get political, it's not limited to the left necessarily, although obviously a lot of those people happen to be on the left, but there is just this attitude among some people that life is dark and happiness is an exception rather than the rule. And it's the duty of the, also the people who believe that it's the duty of the author. I forgot who said that, that it's the duty of the author to show the world as it is. But then there are people who believe in showing the world as it should be. And that would make a difference in the kind of entertainment that we choose, because if we think the world is dark, then we will, and if we think that fiction should show it as is, then we will read stuff that's dark. But if we think that there should be more light and there should be more happiness in the world, then we will choose it in our fiction as well. So I think it's just the worldview more than anything else. Which again, it tends to come from the left, but not necessarily.
No, not necessarily. There is a strong amount of overlap there politically, but it doesn't necessarily translate into left-wing fiction. Yeah, I tend to be of the view that that fiction should show the world as it is, but I also tend to believe that the world is not all darkness and pain and despair, and that if we focus on everything that is negative and everything that is dark, and we sit there examining our own navels 24/7, we won't actually see the world as it is. It's like what the establishment seems to be providing to us is it's a very distorted funhouse mirror view of what the world really is. And you can see that in a lot of the fiction that is, quote, award worthy, that the emphasis seems to be on that navel gazing, on that, oh, look how terrible this character has it in their circumstance. Let's feel sorry for this character. And let's get angry at how unjust and horrible the world is. And, there's a place for commenting on injustices in society, but I think in order to really be accurate and true to the world as it actually is, we also have to take into account the things that are positive in this world and the things that are uplifting and hopeful about human beings. We are not. It's almost like the establishment has sort of embraced that old time Calvinist idea that man is utterly depraved and only the mercy of God will save them. Although in this case, it's the mercy of their utopian vision will save us from our utter depravity. And that's just not how human beings actually are. I mean, there are many things about humanity that are kind of disturbing and are kind of negative, but there are many things about humanity that are positive too. And a truly realistic story is going to show both of those sides.
Right, and it's interesting that you say that about Calvinism, because it's, as I said, we think that a lot of it is coming from the left, but it's almost like back in the day, it came more from the right.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Christians were, I don't know, a few decades ago, you would hear of Christians being basically opposed to fun, and you have to repent and look at all the bad things in this world and just pray for salvation. And now it's almost switched, because you have Christians, at least a lot of Christian writers that you and I kind of hang out with. A lot of them have a much brighter worldview than that comes from the left, from people who are atheists. And I've seen both sides. I grew up under atheism, and I always thought, if you don't believe in afterlife, if you don't believe in anything bigger than the man, then you think you would enjoy life once, for as long as it lasts, rather than to seek out the darkness. But it doesn't seem to be the case. It's almost like the attitudes have switched somehow, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem that way. Actually, I recall running across a book, and I think it might be in my To Be Read mountain, which I'm sure you have one of those as well. But in my To Be Read mountain, I think there is a book that talks about how that has as its thesis that basically the kind of secular political enthusiasms that run through a lot of our society, like environmentalism, like the thirst for social justice and whatnot, are basically converted versions of the old-time Protestant moralizing, that that it was in fact a transition from where we're going to moralize about drinking alcohol and temperance and whatnot, and when people lost faith in the Judeo-Christian moral system, they still held on to that basic moralistic impulse, but they transferred it to other things. So
right,
so
that's what,
I think we're seeing a similarity for a reason.
Yeah, I think that's what some people refer to as New Puritanism.
Yes.
It's Puritanism without the underlying religion, but it kind of comes from the same place.
Yes. I think a lot of people, out of originally good impulses and good motives that are natural to human beings, want to feel like they're a part of something greater and more moral than just their own self-interest or their own lives. And if they don't have a religious tradition or some other tradition to fall back on in that regard, then oftentimes they are going to be attracted to the environmental cause or the social justice cause, because human beings want to be in these hives together with other people, trying to accomplish something greater than one person can possibly do. And I think that the impulse itself is very noble and is one of the positive things about human nature. But like all positive things in human nature, it can be distorted depending on where you focus that energy. Actually, I've always been of the belief that most of the evil that we see in the world can be traced back to some kind of positive human impulse that has been distorted and twisted and focused on the wrong thing. And that's basically where evil comes from.
Well, yeah, you know what they say about road to hell, so.
Yeah. Yes, it's sort of my fallen angels hypothesis. I mean, if you happen to be of the Catholic Christian persuasion like I am, then you believe that that Satan, the ultimate evil, was once an angel. And I think that kind of informs like how I look at evil in general, that most evil is coming from some sort of good impulse that has been twisted and distorted in a negative and damaging way.
Right.
And I think that we can bring that into the writing of dystopian fiction in a way that a lot of the modern stories haven't. You mentioned before about how President Snow in the Hunger Games trilogy doesn't really have any redeeming qualities that we can perceive. But if you look at how evil really works in the world, like you said, most people get tied up in these ideologies and these totalitarian dictatorships out of initially good motives. In many cases, I mean, there are a few that are just psychopathic and love the power, but I think most people that embrace those kinds of ideologies, they do so out of good motives, and then over time, those motives just get twisted by being a part of that group. And I think that dystopian fiction would be better, I think, if it incorporated more of that aspect of how evil develops and how it flourishes.
Right, and also what makes people come over to the side of evil when they could be fundamentally good people, but they get drawn to it in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so you have the people that get drawn into it because a lot of these totalitarian ideologies, here's another thing that I think things like the Hunger Games don't necessarily communicate that well, is that a lot of these totalitarian ideologies arise when they initially appear in the world. The rhetoric that they use and the words that they use to explain what they're doing sound really nice. Like, I was watching a Dennis Prager video the other day, and and the theme of the video is, why is it that everyone rightfully and universally condemns Nazism, but you don't see the same thing about communism? And one of the reasons that he listed is that because if you look at the words behind what justifies communist systems, it sounds really nice. You know, oh, we're going to make sure that everyone who is needy gets everything that they need, and that nobody is that much richer than anybody else, and that there's no inequality in outcome between people. And we're going to make sure that, you know, women and minorities get everything that they need. And it sounds so nice and so lovely on the surface when you look at the words, but for reasons rooted in human nature, every time people try to apply it, it ends up being a totalitarian hellhole by the end, because people just don't work the way that our aspiring socialists and communists want people to work. And I think dystopian fiction can show a lot of that, can show more of that, and become better fiction in the process.
Right, because again, it has to be something for people to really get into a story. It has to be something relatable.
Yes.
But speaking about nice ideas and ideals and communism, in general, the way most revolutions have gone, like the French Revolution, it starts with idealists, but then at some point, people who are up to power alone will take over. And that's another reason, because idealists are just kind of, you know, Karl Marx didn't really do anything. He just wrote there, or he sat there and wrote his theories. He didn't go out and start killing people for his ideology that he came up with. But someone else took it and he used it and didn't really even distort it, but modified it enough to apply it to the society that we're in, and that's how you got the Bolsheviks in the end taking power, and they were in it for the power. When the people who took over, they were not idealists. They spouted the theory, but they were after power.
Mm-hmm. And I think that any ideology that entrusts a lot of power into a governmental entity of some sort is going to be susceptible to that. You know, as you said, the first line of revolutionaries may in fact be the genuine idealist, but once you have set up a state that has centralized power in that way, then you're automatically going to attract the power hungry, and then they're going to take over and purge the idealists and then apply the system that they want to apply. And that's why, you know, our own framers here in the United States put up barriers to any centralization of power for precisely that reason, you know?
Right, right.
Yeah.
We are fortunate in this country, of course, that we have a tradition of freedom, because there are some countries that just have never had it. Like growing up in Russia, some words just don't exist in the national language because they are not necessary. The word for privacy doesn't exist because there's no such concept. There hasn't been privacy given to the common man pretty much ever. So it's just the very concept of it is so foreign, which is why another reason I set my novel specifically in the United States and not in some fictional country, because I was interested in showing how it would work differently in the United States than even in Europe, or definitely in those fictional countries that seem to exist in the middle of nowhere.
Right. Because we have the tradition that we have here, I think that any attempts to impose a totalitarian system on our society are not going to work out too well. And that's why I kind of laugh at the folks that are so afraid that we're going to drift into totalitarian fascism over the next couple of years. You know, I really don't see that happening. I know my fellow Americans, and if it starts to look like it's turning in that direction, then there's going to be some very stiff resistance, because we are used to basically managing our own affairs and handling our own stuff. And we're not going to like it if the government actually does decide to impose itself in our lives in a greater degree than it is now. I mean, heck, there are Americans now that are very incensed with how powerful the government is now, and you know, and compared to a totalitarian society, we're not even close to that bar right now, even though the government has been guilty of certain abuses that do need to be rectified. You know, all the same, as far as I can tell, for the most part, the institutions of our society are still basically working. You know, Trump can sign an executive order, but then some judge in California can, you know, basically release his own statement and saying, no, I'm sorry, you can't enforce that. That's against the law. And so, and as far as I can see, our current president still has to negotiate with the institutions in place, and he is not in any way remotely close to being a dictator, as far as I can see.
Yeah, it would have to I mean, not that it's impossible, but we're a long, long way from there because you need to have such total disintegration of several different for it to happen that I think it's very, very unlikely for it to happen. Which is kind of why the way I set it up in my novel is that there's still this veneer of democracy, and there's still elections, and there's still, even though there's horrible stuff going on underneath, but the system is still in place. So there's still an opportunity to have resistance and to have a rebellion that's more likely to succeed under the American setup, American system of government, than it would, let's say, in Europe.
Right. Yeah, it's not impossible anywhere, but just based on my understanding of the American personality and the Americans that I have met, and I have been basically all over this country. I grew up a military brat. I've also done a lot of traveling and have been to more than half of the nation, I would say, if I think about all the places that I have been. And nowhere have I really seen any desire for more government. Yes, please, more government. Let's have government invade our lives even more. And what I have seen is a lot of people just getting on with their lives and saying, you know what, I just want to be free to make decisions about my own family and my own business and my own prosperity, and I would like to let other people make decisions on their lives and their families and their jobs and their prosperity. And there really isn't a huge desire for anyone to impose their beliefs or their ideologies on other people, unless you go to a college campus and talk to that tiny minority of agitators on a college campus that basically want to destroy our free speech rights and impose their very hard left views on everyone else. But, if you talk about the average American in general, they're not going to stand for that, no matter from what direction it comes. They're going to want to make decisions for themselves.
Right. And I think we really shouldn't lose sight of that, because it is scary to see some of the stuff that's happening in college campuses, and a lot of the stuff we see on the news. But we have to always remember that folk who are the loudest and most obnoxious are the ones who get all the publicity.
Mm.
And in the end, they are not the ones in the majority. That doesn't mean that they can't come to power. We're not careful, but we can't forget that they're really are not representative of the majority of the people.
Right. No, I mean, as a teacher, I actually work with up-and-coming millennials of high school age, and most of the kids that I talk to, when the subject of trigger warnings or safe spaces or whatever comes up, they kind of see it as a big joke. And they will, and my kids at least, at work, they will, I think I had one class one night that, spent the entire time trading racist jokes with each other, and it's like, and they're like, dude, that's so racist, I'm so triggered. But the whole anti-free speech thing, they don't seem to be embracing it. And And the sense that I get is that the majority of these kids really aren't embracing it, and it is a very loud and very obnoxious minority that is taking up all the breathing room, basically.
Right. And it's almost like if we don't give them attention, I don't know that they would go away, but maybe they will stop believing that they are so very relevant. Because the ones who think that they're relevant and they can force abuse on everybody else, and the more attention we give them, the more they get encouraged. So I think, not that we should just let them run wild, but I think we should give them as much credibility as we do right now.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I would like to see is more college administrations actually coming out and saying, no, we're not giving you anything you demanded, and then dropping the mic and leaving. That's really what I want to see. I don't want to see, I don't want to see any more of this capitulating. Yes, we're sorry, we'll give you that mandatory course on social justice, and we'll give you that Black student union that you want. I just want some administrator somewhere to be like, no, you can kick and cry and scream all you want, but I'm not giving you what you want. Mic dropped. That's what I want to see.
Beginning to happen. I think University of Chicago recently said they weren't going to have speech codes. I've seen a couple of places said that, you know what, forget it. And it's great to see. And I think it's going to come, in the end, it's going to come from the alumni, from the donors who have influence over the administration. There needs to be some pressure coming that way, because the administration is basically just trying to keep everybody happy, and they tend to go the path of least resistance, which a lot of times unfortunately happens capitulating to the obnoxiousness.
Excuse me. Getting back to the subject of fiction, beyond the dystopian genre, are there any other genres that you enjoy in particular?
I like heroic fantasy. I like one of my favorite authors is Terry Goodkind. I like Brandon Sanderson. I like, when I have time, I like to get those door stoppers and just get lost in them.
The ones that come with the maps in the beginning and the indices of names and stuff. Yeah.
And everything.
Yeah.
So I do like that. And again, I tend towards the more positive ones, more inspiring ones. I didn't even start with George Martin because just even the people who enjoy it, they basically enjoy all the horrible stuff that happens to all these horrible people. I want old-fashioned kind of stories with heroes and villains. And, I don't want the two to be switching constantly, where you don't know who to root for, and you don't know who's going to just get killed for no reason, just so people would talk about it. I hate when writers do that, when they just kill someone off just so there is a big discussion on the internet.
Right.
No, you have to do better than that. You have to write a better story. You don't do rape and murder and torture just for shock value.
Right. I think there isn't anything necessarily wrong with killing off a character, even a major character, but it has to be something that, as you said, is earned by the story. It's not something that just happens just because you just want to destroy the reader. You have to have a reason why that happens, and it has to add to the story in some way.
Right. Have you read Good Kind at all?
Actually, no. My reading preferences tend more towards the space opera and the kind of Campbellian hard SF, and a little bit less towards the fantasy. Although I am always happy to pick up any fantasy that someone I trust recommends to me.
Right. I'm trying to get more into hard sci-fi lately, just because so many of my friends are reading it. But still a little bit of the soft sci-fi side. I do enjoy John C. Wright lately. Like, I mean, I love the Golden Age, and then I kind of stepped away. And then I came back with to some of his newer works, which are somewhat different, but it's still just the complexity of the world and the language,
Mm-hmm.
just genres between. He kind of goes from fantasy to sci-fi almost seamlessly, and not in a way where the reader feels cheated. Like, you know, when in Star Wars you have the Force, and then all of a sudden, oh no, it's this thing in the blood.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah.
But some authors can get away with switching genres and blending the two seamlessly and still having a great story. So
right.
he's able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. One author that that I've really enjoyed lately is Chuck Gannon. Have you ever read any of his books?
No. It's one of those people on my list.
Yeah. Yeah, but one thing I enjoy about Chuck Gannon, who I would classify, his work has fallen under many different classifications. He's sometimes been classified as space opera, sometimes as military SF, sometimes as hard SF. I would put him in the moderately hard SF category because a lot of the things that he incorporates into his world are very realistically based, not only in what we know of science and technology in terms of space travel and whatnot, but also how he treats geopolitics on Earth is very realistic too. He has clearly thought a great deal about how kind of the situation right now is going to translate a century hence. And you can see that in the work. Of course, his work also has aliens too, which kind of puts him in the space opera category, because if you talk to, you know, the hard SF purists, they're like, no aliens, no aliens, no aliens. Aliens is a space opera thing. So he does have aliens, which puts him in space opera too, but he's also put a lot of thought into his alien societies as well. And that's something that I personally enjoy as a reader, is when a science fiction author actually takes the time to think through how his aliens biology and whatnot is going to influence how the society functions. And Chuck does that, so that's another reason why I like his books a great deal. All right, well, I think we are at about the hour mark, so I think we are going, yeah. So I think we're going to close at this point. Is there any sort of final remarks that you would like to share with the audience before we end the broadcast?
I guess I'd like to plug the Freedom Flight anthology since I have the mic.
Yes, please.
It's something that we put together at Conservative Libertarian Fiction Alliance. It's a good sampler of our authors. a story that I wrote that's a backstory from one of my characters in Chasing Freedom. And it really has a good variety. And more importantly, the money from the book goes to support Foundation for Individual Rights Education, that basically supports freedom of speech and just individual rights on campus, which if you've been paying attention at all, you
That's
know
a
how
serious issue.
important it
Yeah.
is nowadays. So
Yeah.
I just highly recommend for people to check out that book.
And yes, full disclosure, my brother also has a story in that anthology, but the fact that that is the case in no way has influenced my allowing Marina to plug it. It is, in fact, a very good anthology. Beyond my brother's story, I mean, there are other stories in there that are also quite excellent, including Marina's own story. So I would like to second that recommendation. Do check out that anthology. And the proceeds are definitely going to a good cause. We do need people out there fighting for the free speech rights of students and faculty members and anyone else on campus who feels that they're, or who definitely have their rights under threat currently. All right, anything else before we finish?
To be continued.
Yeah, I guess so.
Thank you so much for having me on. And I'm glad we've figured out the technology of it. So I'm looking forward to more of your broadcasts.
Yes, I'm thinking at this point I might do one every couple of weeks if I can get guests on here to talk about their work and talk about other issues that occur to us. I may also introduce some more structured discussions. This one was kind of free form, as we decided in the pre-show chat, but we can definitely do themed podcasts with many guests in which we talk about one thing in particular, and we'll see how this works out over time. I'm very happy that you were able to come today, and hopefully we will talk again soon.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.